The sun had barely begun to set when Marcus Davis returned home from a long week away. His black SUV rolled slowly up the winding road that led to his mansion's front gate, a sprawling estate he had built after years of hard work, sacrifice, and service. Marcus had always believed that home was the one place where peace could not be taken from a man. But as he approached his gate, he noticed something unusual. 3 HOA board members stood blocking the entrance, arms folded, postures stiff with entitlement. Their cars were parked in a line, angled across the road as though to form a barricade. Marcus lowered his window, confused. He had lived here for 5 years, had never missed a payment, had maintained his property with pride. "Good evening," he said evenly. "Could you move your cars so I can enter my property?" A woman stepped forward, her tone clipped and cold. "Mr. Davis, this community has standards. We've received complaints about gatherings at your home, people coming and going at odd hours. Until this is resolved, you won't be allowed inside." Marcus's brows furrowed. He knew exactly what she meant. To them, his family barbecues, his church friends visiting, even his laughter echoing in the evening air, were disturbances. And the odd hours? That was his work, the life he had chosen long ago as a soldier, and later as a man who moved in shadows to protect his nation. Still, he kept his voice calm. "This is my home. You have no right to block me from entering it." But their silence was heavy, their stance unyielding. It was not rules they were enforcing. It was control. It was the quiet sting of discrimination. Marcus stepped out of his SUV, standing tall in the glow of the streetlight. At 6'2", with the quiet presence of someone who had faced war zones, his composure alone unsettled them. Yet the woman crossed her arms tighter, defiance masking her unease. "Until the board reviews your case, you stay out. That's final." For a moment, Marcus felt that old familiar ache, the reminder that no matter how high he climbed, how hard he worked, there would always be those who looked at his skin before they looked at his character. His mansion, his success, his sacrifices, none of it shielded him from the deep-rooted prejudice that ran through people who believed they had the power to decide who belonged. He took a slow breath. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've done for this country?" The man to her left sneered. "We don't care what you've done. Around here, rules are rules." Marcus almost laughed. Rules. He knew rules. He had followed them in jungles, in deserts, in places where one mistake meant lives lost. But this wasn't about rules. This was about reminding him, the only black man in this exclusive neighborhood, that he was a guest in a world they thought belonged to them. He checked his watch. He had been trained to measure time, to read situations, to calculate. "You should move your cars," he said quietly, almost as advice. "Because if I call my people, you won't like how this ends." The woman raised her chin, mistaking his calm for bluff. "Then call them." Marcus's eyes darkened. It had been years since he needed to summon his crew. But tonight, that line had been crossed. And once crossed, there was no turning back. 10 minutes later, the night air began to shift. At first, it was subtle, the low hum of engines, the synchronized crunch of tires rolling over gravel. Then came the headlights, sharp beams cutting through the dark. One SUV. Then another. Then 3 more. The gated street was soon lined with vehicles, black and unmarked, their presence both quiet and commanding. The HOA board members turned, startled, as doors opened in unison. Men and women stepped out, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, moving with the precision of those who had been trained to survive where others could not. They were Marcus's people, his special ops crew, brothers and sisters forged not by blood but by battle. Some had retired, some still served, but all had answered his call without hesitation. The woman at the gate tried to mask her fear, but her voice faltered. What is this?" Marcus's gaze remained steady. "This is what respect looks like when it's earned. These are the people who have stood beside me in places you can't imagine. And tonight, they stand beside me here, because no one keeps me from my home. One of the men, tall and imposing, stepped forward. His presence alone carried the weight of authority. "Sir," he said to Marcus, his tone clipped, military sharp. "Perimeter secure. Orders." The HOA members shrank back, realizing the tide had turned. These weren't rowdy party guests or unwanted visitors. These were professionals. Warriors. People who had seen more than the sheltered suburban streets could ever comprehend. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Move the cars," he told them. "Now." And in that moment, the silence carried more power than any threat could. The man who had sneered earlier shifted uneasily, glancing at the armed precision surrounding him. This is intimidation," he stammered, though his voice betrayed his fear. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No. Intimidation is when someone abuses their position to block a man from his own gate, knowing he's alone. This is balance. This is me reminding you that I am never alone." The woman's facade of authority began to crumble. She looked at Marcus, then at the quiet, disciplined force standing behind him. They were not shouting. They were not threatening. Their very presence spoke of power controlled, loyalty earned, and discipline honed. One of Marcus's crew leaned in, his voice low but firm. "Sir, we can escort you inside." Marcus nodded. "We'll wait." He wasn't going to force them out of the way, not yet. He wanted them to make the choice, to realize the gravity of what they had tried to do. He wanted them to see the difference between pettiness and true strength. The silence stretched on until finally, the woman's composure snapped. She waved at her companions. "Move the cars." With reluctant motions, the SUVs shifted, pulling aside to open the road. The barricade was gone. The gate to Marcus's mansion stood tall, illuminated by the driveway lights, waiting for its owner. Marcus turned back to them one last time. "You tried to strip me of dignity tonight," he said, voice calm yet carrying the weight of steel. "But what you've really done is reveal your own weakness. You measured me by the color of my skin. I measure myself by the lives I've saved, the battles I've fought, the home I've built. Remember that." The convoy of black SUVs followed Marcus through his gates, engines rumbling like a vow of solidarity. The mansion lights glowed against the night, no longer just a symbol of success, but of defiance, resilience, and pride. Marcus's crew parked neatly, stepping out with the same discipline as when they'd arrived. Inside, his family waited, his wife, his children, faces lit with relief when they saw him walk through the door. They had been watching from the windows, hearts pounding as the standoff unfolded. Marcus kissed his wife's forehead and whispered, "It's over." But he knew it wasn't truly over. Incidents like this weren't isolated. They were echoes of a larger truth, that dignity for black men and women was still something some people felt entitled to deny. And that reality was as dangerous as any battlefield. Later that night, Marcus stood on his balcony, his crew gathered around the fire pit below, laughter and warmth filling the air. He thought of the board members, of their fear when they saw real strength, not the kind written in bylaws, but the kind written in sacrifice. He whispered to himself, a promise carried by the wind, "No one will ever lock me out of my own home again." The mansion behind him was more than brick and stone. It was testimony. Proof that no matter how high prejudice tried to raise its barriers, he would always rise higher. He had fought too many wars, buried too many brothers, to surrender here. And as the firelight flickered across the faces of his loyal crew, Marcus knew one thing with absolute certainty: dignity defended is dignity secured.